Hey everybody, welcome back. This is grade 7 history, and today we're talking about the air conditioner and its understanding historical data, which I know sounds a little odd, but trust me, it's really interesting. You need a pencil and a piece of paper. And before we get started, I want you to ask yourself, how are you feeling mentally? Do you need some water? Do you need to take a break? And are you in a space to be productive? And if you're not, maybe you should try to find a place that you can be productive. So here's our warm up. So on your piece of paper, I want you to answer these questions. I'm going to read both of them, and then I'm going to count down from 3 to 1. I want you to pause the video, and when you're ready and you have your answers, you can hit resume, and we can go over them. So first one, what is the difference between a table and a graph? Second one, what is the x-axis on a graph? And what is the y-axis on a graph? And I am not a math teacher, but I promise you this will have some use for today's lesson. So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, welcome back. So here is the first one. So here's a sample table on the left, and here's a sample graph on the right. A table is an organized display of data, while a graph is a visual representation of data. So graphs oftentimes come from tables. So graphs visually represent with a shape or some kind of thing the data that you see in a table. The x-axis is what is the horizontal line on a graph, and the y-axis is the vertical line. And we'll talk more about that in the mission. Okay, so by the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe how the invention of the air conditioner affected the population of the Sun Belt states during the mid-20th century by analyzing and interpreting historical data. So if you don't know what Sun Belt means, we're going to look at that in a couple seconds. So first off, we're going to look at the words of the week. Then we're going to give some background information on the air conditioner. We're going to analyze some data together, and then I'm going to just briefly describe the weekly mission. So the 2 words of the week, go ahead and write these down in space, put a couple spaces between each of them so you can write the definitions when the time comes, are census and then Sun Belt. A census is an official count or survey of a population, typically recording various details of individuals. The data that we're going to look at comes from part of the census. The census comes out every 10 years, and this is actually a census year, so your parents might have actually filled out their census information already. And what the census is, it's a series of questions that the government uses to make decisions, to know how many people live in a state, what are the average ages of people in certain areas, and a bunch of other stuff like that. The other word is Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is a region comprising 15 southern states of the United States and extending from Virginia and Florida in the southeast through Nevada in the southwest, and also including Southern California. So if you think about it, what do these 15 states have in common? They're all very hot in the summer. That's why it's called the Sun Belt. So go ahead and write these 2 definitions down if you need to. This is a map with a very crudely drawn circle that I tried to do of what comprises most of the Sun Belt. Sometimes you'll see the Sun Belt extending up through Southern Virginia as well. So notice these are all very, very hot areas, especially in the summertime. Okay, so the air conditioner. Before air conditioning became widespread, people who lived in these hot places had to adjust their daily lives to survive in the heat, and they did so in some pretty ingenious ways. Houses were constructed differently. So we're going to look at a sample house that was designed specifically to beat the heat in a second. But people also designed houses that had high ceilings and windows in specific places to promote airflow through the house, because people's windows were open all the time. Now, if you have air conditioning, you're not supposed to let the windows up because it lets the cool air out. But back in the day, before air conditioning, you wanted the wind to come in, and people would design their houses to promote that. And people changed their daily routines. So they went swimming just to beat the heat, not just for fun. They took naps in the middle of the day. That's where the term siesta, you can still hear it now. Some countries, especially in very hot places, still do this. And some parts of towns will actually close from the hours between like 2 and 5 when the heat is the highest, so people can go take naps just to get out of the sun. And people often had handheld fans. So if you ever seen a movie that's set in the 50s or early, and there's a bunch of people in a church or something, and they're all fanning themselves, that's because the church didn't have air conditioning. So here is a sample plan of a house called a Dogtrot house. And this was a very common house back in the South about 100 years and so, or 100 years ago or so. Notice it has a front porch, and then it has this thing called a breezeway or a dog trot. This is an open area that the wind can go through. Notice there's two sections to the house, and they're separated by this breezeway so the wind can go through into the houses. Oftentimes, the kitchen was on one side and the living quarters was on the other side, because you don't want the kitchen with the hot stove and all that stuff in the same places as the bedrooms and everything. And I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like. So this is kind of a sample of what the Dogtrot house looks like. There's a breezeway. Here are the two sections separated by this open area that was designed to promote wind flowing through. So the first air conditioner was constructed by Willis Carrier, that's that guy down in the bottom right corner, in 1902. It was designed to keep paper from wrinkling in the heat at a publishing company. So it wasn't even designed to keep people cool at first. It was designed to keep paper cool because the paper would wrinkle and start to decay faster. And it wasn't really used in private homes yet. During the 1920s and the 1930s, in the Depression era, most normal people did not have access to air conditioners in their homes. It was only for the rich. But they were able to enjoy air conditioning in a specific public place. So I want you to pause it after I read this, and I want you to write down 2 or 3 places where you think that people could go and enjoy air conditioning in a public place. So pause it in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so hopefully you figured out that people would go to movie theaters to enjoy the air conditioning. And oftentimes people, especially in the southern states, would go almost as much for the air conditioning as it would for the movies. After World War II, so about 1945 onwards, the manufacture of air conditioners increased drastically, and the average person could expect to start seeing them in their homes. So we know that the production of air conditioners increased drastically because of some data that was collected through part of the census. So I'm taking us to a part of the Census Bureau called the Historical Statistics of the United States from Colonial Times to 1970. So what this is this shows us just a whole bunch of information about the US from the years 1610 to 1970. All right, so we know we're looking for air conditioners. So we have to find that in all of this information. How are we going to find something about air conditioners specifically? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at part 1, just what's on the screen right here. And I want you to pause it after I give this instructions. There is something in part 1 that will tell us exactly where to find information about air conditioners. I want you to look through and I want you to write that down. So I want you to pause it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so hopefully you noticed this word appendix, and hopefully you remember that the word appendix means a section of a book or a report where you can go and it will tell you what page numbers specific subjects are. So if we click on appendix, and I'm just going to go down to speed this up because I've already looked through this. And we get down to the appendix. Notice that this information is organized in alphabetical order. So if we zoom in, we can see air transportation, and there's different stuff about air transportation. And then, oh, air conditioners, perfect. That's exactly what we need. And we can know to look on page 694 to 695, okay? So what you would have to do then is you'd have to click around and find which pages are 694 to 695. Now I've already done that to save us some time, and it's in manufacturers. So once you get there, you just start looking at the page numbers. We're gonna go down, 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 694, almost there, almost there. Okay, here we are. So on page 694 is this information about air conditioners. I'm gonna zoom in so we can talk about it together. So right here, room air conditioner shipped. And if you look, this is a table. There's a whole lot of information, a whole lot of numbers. 1970. And notice it keeps going down. So let's scroll down a little bit. And here we go. Okay. So we have room air conditioner shipped from 1945 up to 1970. These lines right here tell you that there were no room air conditioners shipped. And I want you to think about this. So I want you to look at this table and I want you to tell me how many room air conditioners were shipped in 1945. So I want you to pause it when I think, and then I want you to write down the number you think room air conditioners were shipped in 1945. So in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so if you wrote down the number 1, you're actually wrong, because this number right here, 1,000, is the scale. So in 1945, there were actually 1,000 room air conditioners shipped. So each of these numbers in the column, you need to multiply that number by 1,000. So let's look. So from 1945 to 1946, notice that number keeps growing. And there's a really significant jump I see from 1952 to 1953. We go from 372,000 air conditioners shipped to 1,018,000 air conditioners shipped. So notice that number continues to go up as we go up in year because they're making and shipping more air conditioners. From 1956 to 1970, we go from about 2 million to about 5.5 million air conditioners shipped. So what we want to be able to make a historical statement with this. So based on what we're looking at, I want you to write down a sentence that explains this data. So when I'm going to count it down one more time, and I want you to pause it, and I want you to write down a historical sentence that explains what's going on here. And then I'll give you some samples in a second. So pause it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a good historical sentence would be something like this. The census data shows that from the year 1945 to the year 1970, the manufacture of room air conditioners increased drastically. And then you could even give examples of the data from 1,000 in 1945 to 5.5 million in 1970. So what we did is we looked at this data, we made sense of it, and then we were able to make a historical statement based on that. So what you guys are going to do for Thursday's mission is you're going to do that by yourself. You're going to analyze some charts and graphs in order to determine the effect of air conditioners on the population of Sunbelt states during the mid-20th century. So what is the relationship between these air conditioners and the population of people living in southern states? So I hope you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon.